I was a silent housewife with no power and no voice. My husband and his family accused me of a crime I never committed and sent me to prison. Every month they came pretending they cared. I refused to see them. The day I walk free will be the day they pay for every lie. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The wedding dress had been Beth Crowell's choice. Ivory satin with pearl buttons down the back, the kind that required help to fasten. Lydia had stood in the church dressing room that morning, arms raised, while her future mother-in-law secured each button with practiced fingers. "Perfect," Beth had said, stepping back. "Just perfect." Lydia hadn't felt perfect. She'd felt like a doll being dressed for display. That was 6 years ago. Now, sitting at the kitchen table of the house she and Evan rented 3 blocks from his parents, Lydia ran her finger along the rim of her coffee cup and watched rain streak the window. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled perpetually of old grease, no matter how much she scrubbed. They'd talked about buying something bigger. They'd talked about a lot of things that never happened. Evan was at the trucking company office. He was always at the office. Lydia was 29 years old and couldn't remember the last time she'd made a decision that mattered. The paperwork started arriving in their 2nd year of marriage. Evan would bring home manila folders, set them on the dining table after dinner, and explain what needed to be done. Invoices to file, bills to pay, numbers to enter into spreadsheets. "You're good with details," he'd said. "Better than me." It had felt like trust at first, like partnership. She'd been wrong about that, too. Lydia opened the folder sitting in front of her. Inside were shipping manifests from the previous month. Some of the dates looked strange, sequential numbers that skipped weeks, then doubled back. She'd noticed things like this before. Small inconsistencies, numbers that didn't quite match. She never asked about them. Asking meant suggesting Evan, or worse, Raymond, had made a mistake. And Raymond Crowell didn't make mistakes. He made decisions and everyone else adjusted. The phone rang. Lydia reached for it automatically. Crowell residence. "Lydia, honey." Beth's voice was warm in that way that never quite reached genuine. "Are you busy?" Lydia looked at the paperwork spread across the table. "Not really." "Good. I need you to pick up Raymond's prescription. The pharmacy closes at 5. It wasn't a request. "Of course," Lydia said. "You're such a help, sweetheart. I don't know what we'd do without you." The line went dead before Lydia could respond. She sat there for a moment, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone. Then she set it down, gathered the manila folder, and put it back in the exact spot where Evan had left it. The pharmacy was in downtown Mason Ridge, a 15-minute drive through streets lined with brick storefronts that hadn't changed in 40 years. Lydia parked in front of the drugstore and went inside, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. The pharmacist recognized her. Everyone in town recognized the Crowells, or at least their name. "Picking up for Raymond?" he asked. "Yes, please." He disappeared into the back while Lydia waited at the counter. Through the window, she could see people passing on the sidewalk. Normal people with normal lives. Jobs they chose, homes they picked, decisions they made. The pharmacist returned with a white paper bag. "That'll be $32.50. Lydia handed him cash from the envelope Beth had left for her last week. The pharmacist counted it, gave her change, and Lydia pocketed the coins without checking them. "Tell Raymond we hope he feels better," the pharmacist said. "I will." She wouldn't. Raymond wasn't sick. The prescription was for blood pressure medication he'd been taking for years. But Lydia smiled and nodded because that's what people expected. Back in the car, she sat with her hands on the steering wheel and stared at nothing in particular. The rain had stopped, leaving the windshield speckled with droplets that caught the afternoon light. She could drive home, put the medication on the kitchen counter, start dinner, wait for Evan, or she could keep driving. The thought surprised her. It wasn't the first time she'd had it, but it was the first time it felt less like fantasy and more like option. She started the engine and drove to the Crowell house instead. Raymond and Beth lived in a two-story colonial at the end of Maple Street, the kind of house that said established family without being ostentatious. The lawn was always trimmed. The paint was always fresh. Beth kept a wreath on the front door that changed with the seasons. Lydia let herself in with the key they'd given her. The house smelled like cinnamon and furniture polish. "Beth," she called out. "In the kitchen, dear." Beth was at the counter, arranging flowers in a vase. She wore slacks and a cashmere sweater, her gray-blonde hair styled perfectly. She looked up when Lydia entered and smiled that measured smile. "You're an angel," Beth said, taking the pharmacy bag. "Raymond's been asking for this all day. Is he home?" "At the office. Always at the office." Beth set the bag aside and returned to her flowers, adjusting stems with careful precision. "How are things with you and Evan?" "Fine. Just fine." Beth glanced at her. "Marriage should be more than fine, sweetheart." Lydia said nothing. Beth snipped a stem, the scissors making a crisp sound. "You know, when Raymond and I were your age, we were building something together. The company was smaller then, but we had direction. Purpose." She paused. "Do you feel like you have purpose?" The question hung in the air between them. "I help where I can," Lydia said finally. "And we appreciate that. We really do." Beth arranged another flower. "But helping isn't the same as contributing, is it? Raymond and we've talked about giving you and Evan more responsibility. Real responsibility. But we need to know you're ready for it." "Ready how?" Beth looked at her fully now. "Ready to be a Crowell. Not just by name, but by commitment. This family works because we trust each other. We protect each other. We don't ask unnecessary questions." Something cold settled in Lydia's stomach. "I should get home," she said. "Evan will be back soon." "Of course." Beth's smile returned, bright and empty. "Thank you again for picking this up. You're so dependable." Lydia left the house feeling like she'd just been warned about something she didn't understand. The audit notification arrived on a Tuesday in October. Lydia was folding laundry when Evan came home early, his face pale, a thin envelope in his hand. He walked past her without speaking and went straight to the phone. She watched him dial, wait, speak in low, urgent tones. "Dad, we need to talk. Now." He hung up and finally looked at her. "What's wrong?" Lydia asked. "Nothing. Family business." He grabbed his keys. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up." He was gone before she could ask anything else. Lydia stood in the living room, a half-folded sheet in her hands, and felt the air pressure change like a storm rolling in. Evan didn't come home that night, or the next morning. When he finally returned, it was with Raymond and Beth in tow. They entered the house like they owned it, Raymond first, commanding and grim. Beth behind him wearing an expression Lydia had never seen before. Something harder than concern. Something closer to calculation. "Sit down, Lydia," Raymond said. It wasn't a request. She sat on the couch. Evan remained standing near the door, not looking at her. Beth took the armchair, hands folded in her lap. Raymond stood in the center of the room, like a general addressing troops. "The company's being audited," he said. "Federal investigators. They're claiming there are discrepancies in the accounts." Lydia's mouth went dry. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Missing money. Altered documents." Raymond's eyes fixed on her. "Documents you've handled." The room tilted slightly. "I don't understand," Lydia said. "The paperwork Evan brought home," Beth said quietly. "The invoices you filed. The bills you paid. They're saying some of those were fraudulent." "That's not possible. I just entered what Evan gave me." "We know you were trying to help," Beth interrupted, her voice soft, almost soothing. "But you made mistakes, honey. We all make mistakes." "I didn't make mistakes." Lydia looked at Evan. Tell them. You gave me everything. I just did what you asked. Evan finally met her eyes. I showed you what to do, Lydia, but you handled the actual filing. You had access to the accounts. I didn't. The words hit her like cold water. What are you saying? Raymond stepped closer. We're saying the investigators are going to have questions. They're going to want to talk to everyone who had access to the company's financial records. And right now, that trail leads to you. But I didn't do anything wrong. We believe you, Beth said. Of course we do. But belief and proof are different things. And the proof... She trailed off, looking at Raymond. The proof is going to be complicated, Raymond finished. For all of us, which is why we need to be unified as a family. No confusion. No conflicting stories. Lydia's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs. What story? The truth, Raymond said. That you helped with the accounts. That you had access. That sometimes you seemed overwhelmed by the complexity. I was never overwhelmed. I did exactly what I was told. Lydia. Evan's voice was sharp. Stop. Just stop. She stared at him. This man she'd married. This man she'd trusted with everything. You're protecting yourselves, she whispered. We're protecting the family, Raymond corrected. That includes you, but only if you cooperate. And if I don't? The silence that followed was answer enough. Beth stood, smoothing her slacks. Get some rest, sweetheart. This is all very stressful. We'll figure it out together. They left, all three of them. Lydia sat alone in her living room as the afternoon light faded to evening, and she understood with perfect clarity that she'd just been offered a role in her own destruction. The federal agents came to the house on a Wednesday morning. Lydia was prepared this time. She'd spent the last 3 days gathering every piece of paperwork she'd ever touched for the company, every invoice, every manifest, every note Evan had written her. She had them organized chronologically in boxes, ready to hand over. She would tell them the truth. Everything. Let them sort it out. The agents were professional, almost gentle. A man and a woman, both wearing dark suits, both carrying leather portfolios. They sat at her kitchen table and asked questions while Lydia answered honestly. Who instructed you to file these invoices? My husband, Evan Crowell. Did he explain what they were for? He said they were standard operating expenses for the trucking company. Did you ever question any of the amounts? No. I assumed they were correct. Did you have independent access to the company's bank accounts? No. I only had the paperwork Evan brought home. The agents took notes. They asked for the boxes of documents. Lydia gave them everything. We may need to speak with you again, the male agent said. Of course. I want to help. They left, and Lydia felt something like relief. She'd told the truth. That had to matter. It didn't. The family meeting happened 3 days later. This time it was formal. Raymond's dining room. The long mahogany table. Everyone in their designated seats. Except the seats had changed. Lydia was at the far end now, isolated. Evan sat between his parents. A lawyer Lydia had never met sat across from them. A gray-haired man in an expensive suit who didn't introduce himself. Raymond spoke first. The investigators have reviewed the documents. Good, Lydia said. Then they can see. They can see that you had extensive access to sensitive company information, the lawyer interrupted. His voice was measured, clinical. They can see that you handled financial records without proper oversight. They can see that you were in a position to commit fraud. But I didn't. What you did or didn't do is going to be decided by evidence, the lawyer continued. And right now the evidence doesn't favor you. Lydia looked at Evan. Tell them you gave me everything. That I was just following your instructions. Evan stared at the table. I showed you how to file paperwork. But I never told you to alter documents or misreport expenses. I never altered anything. Lydia. Beth's voice cut through. Sweetie, listen to me. This family has built something important over 3 generations. The trucking company employs 46 people. 46 families depend on us. If this company goes down, all of them suffer. Do you understand? I understand you're blaming me for something I didn't do. We're trying to protect you, Raymond said, but his tone suggested otherwise. If you cooperate, if you accept responsibility for your role, your mistakes, we can minimize the damage. The prosecutors will see remorse. The judge will see someone who got in over their head, not a criminal. My role. Lydia's voice was rising. I had no role except doing what Evan told me to do. That's not what Evan remembers, the lawyer said flatly. She looked at her husband again, really looked at him, saw the set of his jaw, the careful blankness in his eyes, the way he positioned himself between his parents like a shield. You're lying, she said. Evan flinched, but didn't respond. All of you, Lydia continued, her voice steadier now. You're all lying. Raymond leaned forward. We're trying to save you from yourself, Lydia. But if you insist on being difficult, if you insist on dragging this family through the mud with baseless accusations, then we can't help you. Do you understand what that means? She understood perfectly. They'd already decided. The story was written. She was the villain, and they were the victims. I need a lawyer, Lydia said. Of course, the gray-haired man replied. We can recommend several. Not one you recommend. My own lawyer. The temperature in the room dropped. Beth shook her head slowly, a gesture of disappointment. Oh, Lydia, why are you making this harder than it needs to be? Get out of my house, Lydia said. No one moved. This is our house, Evan said quietly. Technically, Dad co-signed the loan. It's in his name, too. The ground shifted beneath her. Raymond stood. Think carefully about your next steps, Lydia. Very carefully. Because once this gets adversarial, we can't protect you anymore. And you're going to need protection. They left her sitting alone at her own kitchen table, and Lydia understood she was fighting something much bigger than a financial crime. She was fighting a family that had chosen their survival over hers. The arrest happened early on a gray November morning. Lydia was still in her nightgown, making coffee when the knock came. Firm. Official. The kind of knock that announces itself. She opened the door to find 2 police officers on her porch. Lydia Crowell? Yes. You're under arrest for wire fraud, falsification of business records, and conspiracy to commit theft. The words felt unreal. Lydia stood there, coffee cup in hand, trying to process. You have the right to remain silent. Neighbors were watching. Mrs. Peterson from across the street. The Hendersons. People she'd waved to for 6 years. Can I at least get dressed? Lydia asked. You have 5 minutes. They followed her inside. Stood in her hallway while she went to the bedroom and put on jeans and a sweater with shaking hands. She could hear them talking in low voices. Radio chatter. Evan wasn't home. He'd left for work early. Or maybe he'd known this was coming. The handcuffs felt cold against her wrists. They walked her to the patrol car. Mrs. Peterson had her hand over her mouth. The Hendersons had turned away. Lydia climbed into the back seat, and through the window, she saw Beth Crowell standing on her own porch 3 houses down, just standing there, watching. Their eyes met. Beth turned and went inside. The public defender assigned to Lydia's case was a tired-looking woman named Janet Ross, who carried 3 other folders along with Lydia's. Their first meeting was in a small conference room that smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. Janet sat across from her, reviewing documents with an expression that suggested she'd already decided how this would end. The evidence is extensive, Janet said without preamble. Altered shipping manifests, false invoices, bank records showing money moved through accounts you had access to. I didn't have access to any bank accounts. I just filed the paperwork. That's what we'll argue. that you were a low-level participant, not the mastermind, that you were following orders. I wasn't participating at all. I was set up. Janet looked at her over the rim of her glasses. Lydia, I've been doing this for 17 years. I know what a setup looks like, and I know what the evidence shows. Right now, the evidence shows your fingerprints on documents that were used to defraud a company of over $400,000. Because my husband gave me those documents to file. And your husband will testify that he gave you legitimate paperwork, and you must have altered it after the fact. Lydia felt the walls closing in. Can we subpoena the company's records? Prove what was given to me. We tried. The company's cooperating with the investigation, but only selectively. They're claiming certain records were lost or destroyed in routine purges. That's convenient. That's strategic. Janet closed the folder. Look, the prosecution is offering a plea deal. 7 years if you plead guilty. With good behavior, you could be out in 5. I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do. Then you're looking at trial. And if we lose, and Lydia, we're probably going to lose, you're looking at 12 to 15 years. The number hit her like a physical weight. How is that justice? Lydia whispered. Janet's expression softened slightly. It's not, but it's the system. And sometimes the system doesn't care about justice. It cares about conviction rates and political pressure and powerful families who know how to protect themselves. The Crowells. I didn't say that. But that's what you mean. Janet didn't deny it. The trial lasted 8 days. Lydia sat at the defense table in clothes Janet had borrowed from some charitable organization, watching her life be dismantled piece by piece. The prosecution presented documents with her handwriting, testimony from company employees who'd received fraudulent payments, bank records showing money flowing through channels Lydia supposedly controlled. She'd never seen those bank accounts, never knew they existed. Didn't you find it suspicious, the prosecutor asked during cross-examination, that your husband brought so much sensitive company paperwork home? I trusted him, Lydia said. You trusted him, but you never questioned the numbers, the amounts, the unusual dates. I assumed he knew what he was doing. Or perhaps you knew exactly what you were doing, and you're simply playing naive now. Janet objected. It was sustained. It didn't matter. When Evan took the stand, he wore a dark suit and spoke in careful, measured tones. He looked at the jury when he testified, never at Lydia. Did you instruct your wife to falsify these documents? The prosecutor asked. No. I showed her how to do basic filing, but I never told her to alter anything or to access accounts she wasn't authorized for. Did she ever express concern about the paperwork? No. She seemed to understand it. Did you know she was committing fraud? Not until the audit. I was shocked. Lydia watched him lie with perfect composure, and something inside her cracked. Not her resolve. Something deeper. Her faith that people were fundamentally good. That truth mattered. That love meant something. Raymond testified next. Distinguished. Sorrowful. The wronged patriarch. We trusted Lydia like a daughter, he said. To learn she'd been stealing from us, from the company my father built. It's been devastating. Did you have any indication she was capable of this? She always seemed quiet, eager to help. I suppose we mistook that for loyalty. Beth cried on the stand. Real tears. Perfect grief. We tried to include her, she told the jury. We wanted her to feel like family, and she betrayed that trust. She betrayed all of us. Janet cross-examined weakly, asked about documentation, about oversight, about why a massive fraud could happen without the family noticing. The answers were rehearsed, airtight. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was brief. The judge, an older man who'd probably known the Crowells for years, looked down at Lydia with something like pity. Mrs. Crowell, you've been convicted of serious crimes. Crimes that affect not just your immediate family, but an entire community. The employees who depend on Crowell Trucking, the clients who trust them. Your actions have damaged that trust irreparably. Lydia wanted to speak, to scream that it was lies, all of it, but Janet had advised silence. I'm sentencing you to 9 years in the state correctional facility for women. 9 years. Lydia felt nothing. The number was too big to process. You'll be eligible for parole after serving 7 years, provided you demonstrate genuine remorse and rehabilitation. Remorse for a crime she didn't commit. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Lydia looked back at the gallery. The Crowells sat in the front row. Raymond's expression was grave. Evan stared at his hands. Beth was crying again. "We still love you," Beth called out as Lydia was led away. "We'll pray for you, sweetheart." Lydia didn't respond, didn't acknowledge, didn't look back, because she understood now with perfect clarity they hadn't just framed her. They'd erased her, made her disappear into their convenient story while they continued their lives untouched. And that was something she would never forgive. The prison van drove through countryside she used to think of as home, and Lydia Crowell began the process of becoming someone new, someone harder, someone who would remember everything. The State Correctional Facility for Women sat 40 miles north of Mason Ridge, surrounded by fields that turned gold in autumn. Lydia saw it first from the van window: gray concrete walls, coiled wire, guard towers against an overcast sky. It looked exactly like what it was, a place where people disappeared. The intake process was mechanical. Strip search, medical exam, delousing shower, standard issue clothes in washed-out blue, a number instead of a name. Inmate 847,392. Lydia stood in line with 17 other women, all of them learning the same lesson. Here, you were reduced to essential parts: hands, eyes, compliance. She was assigned to D Block, cell 23. Her cellmate was already there when she arrived, a black woman in her 50s named Teresa, sitting on the lower bunk with a paperback Western. "You're in the top bunk," Teresa said without looking up. "Don't touch my things. Don't ask personal questions. Don't snore. Okay. You got people on the outside?" Lydia thought about Evan, about Beth's tears in the courtroom. No. Good. Makes it easier. Teresa went back to her book, and Lydia climbed to the upper bunk, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. Someone was yelling 3 cells down. Someone else was crying. The fluorescent lights hummed. This was home now. The first weeks were an education in survival. Lydia learned the rhythms. Morning count at 6. Breakfast in the cafeteria where women ate in careful groupings, racial, gang-affiliated, or simply circumstantial. Work assignments started at 8. Lydia was sent to the laundry facility, a sweltering room where machines roared and steam made everything damp. She folded sheets, sorted uniforms, kept her head down. "You scared?" one woman asked her during a cigarette break. Her name was Kelly, young and sharp-eyed. "Should I be?" "Depends what you're in for." "Fraud." Kelly laughed. "White-collar crime. You'll be fine. Just stay quiet and don't owe anybody nothing." Sound advice. Lydia followed it. But quietness in prison meant something different than quietness outside. Inside, silence was observation. Noticing who ran what, who owed whom, who to avoid. Lydia noticed everything. She noticed that the guards rotated shifts on a pattern, that certain inmates got extra privileges for reasons never discussed, that information moved through the facility like electricity through wiring, fast, dangerous, and always valuable. Teresa noticed her noticing. "You're smarter than you look," Teresa said one night, lying in her bunk with the lights off. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact. Most people who come in here, they either break or they fight. You're doing something else." "What's that?" "Learning." Lydia didn't respond, but Teresa was right. 6 months in, Lydia was approached by a woman named DeMarco. She was tall, muscular, with a scar running from her temple to her jaw. People moved aside when she walked. "You worked in accounting." DeMarco asked in the yard. "Bookkeeping," Lydia corrected. "Same thing. My appeal's fucked because my lawyer can't understand the financial records." "You understand financial records?" "Yes. Look at this." DeMarco handed her a folder through the fence. Inside were bank statements and transaction logs, all marked up with angry annotations. Lydia scanned them, saw the problem immediately. "Your lawyer's arguing that you didn't have access to these accounts. But these statements show your name as an authorized user. See? Right here." DeMarco leaned closer. "Can that be fixed? Can it be proven you didn't authorize it? That someone added you without your knowledge?" "Maybe. Then your lawyer needs to get the bank's internal audit trail, the actual authorization forms with signatures. Compare them to samples of your handwriting. If they don't match, then someone set me up." Their eyes met. "Yeah," Lydia said quietly. "Someone set you up." DeMarco took the folder back. "You helped me with this. I owe you." "I don't want anything." "Everyone wants something." Lydia thought about that. Protection. Just being left alone. "Done." DeMarco walked away, and Lydia understood she'd just made her first prison ally. The work with DeMarco's case continued over weeks. Lydia spent rec time reviewing documents, writing notes and margins, explaining concepts to DeMarco's overworked public defender during phone consultations. The appeal succeeded. DeMarco got a retrial date. Word spread. The woman who could read financial documents, who understood legal language, who could find the holes in prosecution cases. Other inmates started asking for help. Letters to lawyers. Complaints about improper charges. Appeals they couldn't write themselves. Lydia helped. Partly because it gave her purpose. Partly because it taught her how systems worked, how evidence was presented, how courts decided truth. And partly because every case was a mirror of her own. They'd all been buried by people with more power, more resources, more willingness to lie. Year 2 brought the law library. Lydia applied for a position as a library assistant, a coveted job because it meant air conditioning and quiet. The prison librarian was a civilian employee, a retired teacher named Mrs. Hollis, who looked at Lydia's application and then at Lydia herself. "Fraud conviction," Mrs. Hollis said. "Yes. Most women here, they don't read much." "You read." "Everything I can." "Why do you want this job?" Lydia could have lied, said she liked books, that she wanted to help. Instead, she told the truth. "I'm trying to understand how I ended up here, and I think the answers are in those law books." Mrs. Hollis studied her. "You think you're innocent." "I know I am. A lot of people in here know they're innocent." "Maybe they are." That got a small smile. "All right, Mrs. Crowell. Let's see what you can do." The law library became Lydia's education. She read cases, studied statutes, learned about burden of proof, evidence admissibility, witness credibility. She memorized legal standards like some people memorized prayers, and she reviewed her own case, every document, every transcript, every piece of testimony. She saw patterns she'd missed during trial, the way the prosecution had introduced documents without establishing proper chain of custody, the way expert witnesses had been allowed to speculate without foundation, the way Janet had failed to object at crucial moments. But she also saw the brilliance of the Crowell strategy. They hadn't just blamed her. They'd constructed an entire narrative where her guilt was inevitable, where every action she'd taken, even the innocent ones, could be reframed as proof of criminal intent. She was filing paperwork. She was establishing access. She was following instructions. She was creating deniability. She was quiet. She was hiding her crime. It was perfect, airtight, Except year 3. Sitting in the library during a thunderstorm, Lydia found something. She was helping an inmate named Rowan with a civil case, breach of contract, boring stuff, when she recognized a phrase in the opposition's filing. Specific legal language about business disputes and fiduciary responsibility. She'd seen it before. Lydia pulled her own trial transcripts from the request bin where she kept them, scanned through Raymond's testimony, found it. The same phrase, word for word. "That's weird," Rowan said, reading over her shoulder. "It's more than weird." Lydia's hands were shaking. This is boilerplate legal language, the kind lawyers use in corporate cases. So Raymond isn't a lawyer, but he testified using language that reads like it came from a legal brief. Maybe he was coached, or maybe he's been involved in cases like this before. Lydia filed a public records request that afternoon. It took 6 weeks to get results. When they came, they changed everything. The documents arrived in a thick envelope. Summaries of civil cases involving Crowell Trucking Company over the past 15 years. Lydia spread them across a library table and started reading. Most were unremarkable. Late payments, minor contract disputes, the normal friction of business. But one case stood out. 2 years after Lydia's conviction, Crowell Trucking had settled a case brought by a former client who claimed they'd been overbilled through falsified shipping records. The case settled quickly, quietly, with a non-disclosure agreement. The documents filed by the plaintiff included shipping manifests. Lydia pulled out her own trial exhibits, compared them. The forgery pattern was identical. Same altered dates, same type of corrections, same handwriting style. Her breath caught. These manifests were signed by Evan, dated during the exact time period Lydia had supposedly been committing fraud, which meant either Evan had been forging documents all along and the family had quietly paid off the client rather than risk investigation, or Lydia had been blamed for crimes the family was still committing after she was gone. She sat back, staring at the documents, and felt something cold and focused settle in her chest. They'd made one mistake. Just one. They'd gotten comfortable. Teresa found her still at the table 2 hours later, long after the library had officially closed. Mrs. Hollis had let her stay. "You look different," Teresa said. "I am different." Good different or scary different? Lydia gathered the documents carefully. "I just found proof." "Of what?" "That I was right." She didn't explain further. Didn't need to. Teresa understood enough. Over the next year, Lydia worked methodically. She filed more public records requests, business licenses, tax filings, court records from neighboring counties. Each piece cost money she didn't have, so she did legal work for other inmates in exchange for commissary credits, which she traded for cash equivalents, which she used to pay filing fees. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemicals. Crowell Trucking had been involved in shady practices for years. Multiple settlements, multiple complaints, always resolved quietly, always with non-disclosure agreements. Raymond and Beth had built a system where fraud was just business, where getting caught meant paying off the problem and moving on, until the federal audit. That was too big to pay off, so they'd needed a scapegoat. And Lydia had been perfect, the daughter-in-law, the outsider, the one person in the family who didn't have protection. She filed a motion for post-conviction relief based on newly discovered evidence. It was denied. She filed a request for case review. Also denied. She wrote directly to the prosecutor's office, laying out everything she'd found. No response, because new evidence didn't matter if no one with power wanted to listen. Year 5, Lydia hit her lowest point. She'd exhausted her options. Her appeals were dead. Her motions denied. The system had decided her guilt and moved on. She sat in her cell one night, staring at a wall covered in Teresa's Western paperback covers, and wondered if she'd die in here. If in 15 years she'd still be folding laundry and helping inmates with legal work that went nowhere. You giving up? Teresa asked from the lower bunk. I don't know what else to do. You could just do your time. Get out. Start over. And let them win. They already won, Lydia. You're here. They're out there. That's winning. Lydia didn't respond. But Teresa continued, if you're too stubborn to let it go, then you gotta wait for your moment. Every system has cracks. You just gotta find the right one and push. I've been pushing for 5 years. Then push harder. The crack came from an unexpected direction. A new inmate arrived in year 6, a woman named Angela who'd worked as a paralegal before getting convicted of embezzlement. She was smart, angry, and she knew people. Lydia helped her with a visitation rights issue. In return, Angela offered information. I heard you're trying to prove your case was bullshit, Angela said during yard time. Trying, yeah. You need a lawyer, not a public defender. Someone with resources who'll actually fight. Can't afford that. There's non-profits, innocence projects. They take cases pro bono if the evidence is strong enough. I've tried them. They're backed up for years. Then you need press, media attention, someone who'll make noise loud enough that it forces action. Lydia had thought about this, but media meant exposure. It meant the Crowells knowing she was still fighting. It meant risk. How do I do that from in here? She asked. Angela smiled. You write a letter. Tell your story. Send it to every investigative journalist in the state. One of them will bite. Trust me. It took Lydia 3 months to write the letter. She drafted it dozens of times. Stripped out emotion. Focused on facts. Documented everything with case numbers, dates, records, requests. She made it undeniable. Then she sent it to 47 journalists. 43 ignored it. 3 sent polite declines. 1 responded. His name was Marcus. Lydia changed it in her head to Greg when she first read his reply. Greg Thornton was a reporter for an independent news organization that specialized in criminal justice. He'd covered wrongful convictions before. He wanted to talk. The first interview happened over prison phone, monitored and recorded. Lydia told him everything. The marriage, the paperwork, the trial, the civil settlement she'd discovered. Can you prove the manifests match? Greg asked. I have both sets of documents. They're public record now. And no one noticed this during your appeal? My lawyer didn't look. The public defender's office was overwhelmed. No one cared enough to dig. Silence on the line. Then, give me 2 months. I'm going to verify everything you've told me. If it checks out, I'll write it. And if it doesn't, then I'll tell you that too. Lydia hung up and allowed herself one thing she hadn't felt in 6 years. Hope. Greg's article ran on a Tuesday morning in April. Lydia was in the laundry when Mrs. Hollis found her. The librarian looked flushed, slightly out of breath. You need to see this, she said, holding up her tablet. The headline read, Buried by Family, The Case of Lydia Crowell. The article was thorough, devastating. It laid out the timeline, the evidence, the civil settlement the Crowells had hidden. It included copies of the manifests, side-by-side comparisons showing identical forgery patterns. It quoted handwriting experts who confirmed the manifests from the civil case matched trial exhibits, but none of them matched Lydia's handwriting. It ended with a question. How did a woman with no motive, no criminal history, and no access to bank accounts become the scapegoat for a family business's systematic fraud? Lydia read it twice, standing in the laundry facility while machines roared around her. This is big, Mrs. Hollis said quietly. It was. By that afternoon, the article had gone viral. Other news outlets picked it up. Legal blogs analyzed the case. Social media exploded with outrage. And most importantly, the state attorney general's office announced they were opening a review. Lydia sat in her cell that night, listening to the sounds of the prison settling into darkness, and felt something shift. the crack Teresa had talked about. It was opening. The review took 14 months. Lydia waited, worked, helped other inmates, kept her routine. But inside, something had changed. The discipline that prison had taught her, the patience, the attention to detail, the ruthless focus on facts, had hardened into something unbreakable. She would walk out of here, and when she did, she would finish what she'd started. The call came on a Tuesday in July, year 8. "Crowell, you've got legal," a guard announced during evening count. Lydia walked to the visitor's room, expecting another interview with Greg, or maybe someone from the Attorney General's office asking the same questions for the dozenth time. Instead, she found a woman in a sharp suit with a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Crowell, I'm Patricia Kim. I'm with the State Wrongful Conviction Unit." Lydia sat down slowly. "Okay. Your conviction is being vacated. Effective immediately." The words didn't process at first. Lydia heard them, understood their individual meanings, but together they seemed impossible. "What does that mean?" "It means you're free to go. The state has determined that your conviction was based on false testimony and fabricated evidence. We're also opening criminal investigations into Raymond, Evan, and Beth Crowell for perjury, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Lydia's hands were flat on the table. She couldn't feel them. "We're processing your release now. You'll be out by end of day tomorrow." "That's it? I just leave?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. "You've served 8 years for a crime you didn't commit. I wish I could do more than say I'm sorry. But yes, that's it." Lydia nodded, stood, walked back to her cell on legs that didn't quite feel real. Teresa looked up from her bunk. "What happened?" "I'm leaving." "When?" "Tomorrow." Teresa sat up. "Well, shit." Then, after a moment, "You gonna be all right out there?" "I don't know." "You gonna go after them?" Lydia met her cellmate's eyes. "Yes." "Good." Teresa lay back down. "Make it hurt." The next day, Lydia walked through processing with the same paperwork she'd received 8 years ago. Personal effects returned. A wedding ring she immediately dropped in the trash, $47 in cash, the clothes she'd worn to trial. They didn't fit anymore. She'd lost weight, gained muscle from laundry work, changed in ways that had nothing to do with her body. The front gate opened. Lydia stepped outside into sunshine that felt aggressively bright. The parking lot stretched ahead. Beyond it, the road. Beyond that, freedom. And waiting by a car near the gate, the Crowells. All 3 of them. Lydia stopped, just looked at them. Raymond stood in front, aged more than 8 years should allow. Gray hair thinner, face lined. Beth beside him, holding his arm, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Evan hung back. He'd gained weight, looked tired. They'd come to meet her, to control the narrative even now. Raymond stepped forward, hand extended. "Lydia, we're so glad." She walked past him without a word, didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge they existed. "Lydia, wait." "That was Beth. Please, we need to talk." Lydia kept walking. "We know you're angry," Raymond called after her, "but we can work this out. As a family." She turned then, just for a moment. "I have no family," she said clearly. "You made sure of that." Then she walked to the road and started the 3-mile hike to the nearest bus station. Behind her, she heard Beth crying, heard Evan say something in a low voice, heard Raymond's sharp response. She didn't look back. The nonprofit that helped her find housing was run by a woman named Carol, who'd been exonerated after 12 years for a murder she didn't commit. The apartment was small, furnished with donations, on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like cigarettes and cooking oil. It was perfect. Lydia stood in the middle of the living room, looking at someone else's furniture, someone else's kitchen dishes, someone else's idea of a fresh start. She had $300 from the state, a phone number for a counselor, a list of job placement services. What she didn't have was a plan for what came next. That changed when Greg called. "You're out," he said. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. I'm writing a follow-up piece. Want to comment?" "About what?" "The investigation. It's moving faster than anyone expected. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case is treating this seriously." Lydia sat down on the donated couch. "What does that mean?" "It means they're building charges. They've subpoenaed company records, bank statements, employee testimony. This is happening, Lydia. They're going after all three of them." She closed her eyes. "Good. Do you want justice or revenge?" "What's the difference?" Greg laughed, but it wasn't entirely comfortable. "Fair point. Just be careful. These people are going to fight back, and they still have resources." "So do I." "Yeah. What resources?" "I have the truth, and I have nothing left to lose." After she hung up, Lydia sat in the quiet apartment and thought about what came next. She could cooperate with prosecutors, testify, help bury the family that had buried her, or she could do more. The investigation proceeded methodically. Federal agents interviewed current and former Crowell Trucking employees. They discovered a pattern of intimidation, falsified records, and payments to silence complainants. They found evidence that Raymond had been running fraudulent schemes for over a decade. And they found proof that all three Crowells had committed perjury during Lydia's trial. The stress started showing. Greg kept Lydia updated through phone calls. The Crowells had hired expensive lawyers, a firm from Columbus specializing in white-collar crime defense. They'd issued statements denying everything. They'd tried to frame the whole thing as a vindictive ex-wife manufacturing evidence. But the evidence wasn't manufactured. It was overwhelming. Evan cracked first. According to Greg's sources, Evan had wanted to come forward during the initial investigation, had wanted to tell the truth. But Raymond and Beth had convinced him that protecting the family was paramount. Now, facing serious prison time, Evan was reconsidering. He reached out to Lydia through her lawyer, asked to meet. Lydia agreed. They met in a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory. Lydia arrived first, ordered black coffee, and sat where she could see the door. Evan came in 10 minutes late. He looked worse in person than he had at the prison gate. His suit was expensive, but hung wrong, like he'd lost weight recently. His hands shook as he ordered. He sat down across from her. Tried to smile. Failed. "Hi," he said. Lydia didn't respond. I wanted to say." "Don't." He stopped. "Don't apologize," Lydia continued. "Don't explain. Don't tell me you were protecting the family or that you didn't have a choice. Because you did have a choice. Every day for 8 years you had a choice. And you chose them." "I know." His voice was barely audible. "I know I did. And I have to live with that." "No. You have to go to prison with that." Evan flinched. "The prosecutors offered me a deal. If I testify against my parents, I might get reduced charges. But I wanted to talk to you first." "Why?" "Because you deserve to hear it from me. That I'm sorry. That I was wrong. That I—" "Evan." Lydia leaned forward. "I don't care. I genuinely, completely do not care what you feel or what you're sorry about. The only thing I care about is making sure all three of you face consequences. So if testifying against your parents helps that happen, then do it. If not, don't. But don't ask for my permission or my forgiveness because you're not getting either." He stared at her. "You've changed." "Prison does that." "That's not what I mean. You're harder." "I had to be. You made sure of that." She stood up, left her untouched coffee on the table, and walked out. Behind her, she heard Evan start to cry. She felt nothing. Evan took the deal. His testimony to the grand jury was detailed and damning. He explained how Raymond had run the fraud scheme for years, how Beth had coordinated the cover-ups, how they'd pressured him to lie during Lydia's trial. He admitted everything. It didn't save him, he was still charged with perjury and fraud, but it gave prosecutors everything they needed. Raymond and Beth were indicted 3 weeks later. The charges were extensive: conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, witness tampering, perjury, obstruction of justice. The media covered it extensively. The family that had seemed so respectable, so established, so untouchable, now exposed as systematic criminals. The trial strategy was predictable. Raymond's lawyers claimed he was a legitimate businessman who'd made bookkeeping errors, not criminal fraud. They painted Lydia as a disgruntled ex-daughter-in-law manufacturing revenge. Beth's lawyers went further. They claimed she was a devoted wife and mother who'd simply supported her husband, that she'd been manipulated, that she was a victim too. Lydia sat in the gallery during trial and watched them perform. The prosecutor called her as a witness. She walked to the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then she looked at Raymond and Beth in the defendant's seats and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just cold, clear purpose. The prosecutor asked her to describe the paperwork Evan had brought home, the family meetings, the pressure to stay quiet. Lydia testified in precise detail, named dates, quoted conversations, described Raymond's threats and Beth's manipulation. On cross-examination, Raymond's lawyer tried to rattle her. "Mrs. Crowell, isn't it true you harbor significant resentment toward this family?" "Yes." "And that resentment motivates your testimony today?" "No. Facts motivate my testimony. The resentment is just a bonus." Scattered laughter in the courtroom. The judge called for order. Beth's lawyer took a different approach. "You claim to have been close with Mrs. Beth Crowell once, that she treated you like a daughter. She claimed that. I was naive enough to believe it. And now you're trying to send her to prison." "I'm not trying to send anyone anywhere. I'm telling the truth about what they did. Prison is just where people go when they commit crimes." The jury listened, took notes, watched the Crowell squirm. Evan testified next, broke down on the stand, begged for his parents' forgiveness while simultaneously detailing every illegal thing they'd done. It was pathetic and powerful in equal measure. The turning point came when prosecutors introduced the civil settlement documents, the ones Lydia had discovered in prison. They showed the same fraud pattern continuing after Lydia's conviction, which proved conclusively that she couldn't have been the mastermind. The defense had no response. During closing arguments, the prosecutor stood before the jury and spoke plainly. The Crowells built their business on lies. When those lies threatened to collapse, they found a scapegoat. They chose a young woman who trusted them, who had no power to fight back, who they thought would simply disappear into the system. And for 8 years she did. She served time for their crimes while they continued to live free, continued to profit, continued to lie. But truth has a way of surfacing. And today, you have the power to ensure that truth matters more than money, more than family loyalty, more than carefully constructed deceptions. Hold them accountable. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty on all counts. Raymond showed no emotion when the verdict was read. Beth sobbed quietly. Evan, sitting in the gallery, put his head in his hands. Lydia sat perfectly still and watched her vindication become real. Sentencing happened 6 weeks later. Raymond got 12 years. Beth got 8. Evan got 5. The judge's comments were pointed. The defendants committed crimes that were both calculated and cruel. They not only defrauded their business partners and clients, but they destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect themselves. That demonstrates a level of moral bankruptcy that demands significant punishment. After the sentencing, reporters swarmed. They wanted comments, reactions, emotional catharsis. Lydia gave them one sentence: "Justice delayed is still justice." Then she walked away. 3 years after the Crowells were convicted, Lydia sat in a small office on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse. The nonprofit she worked for Second Chance Advocacy, helped women who'd been convicted through family testimony navigate appeals and reentry. Her desk was organized, efficient. She kept a photo on it, not of family or friends, but of the prison law library where she'd learned to fight back. A reminder. The phone rang. Lydia answered without looking. Second Chance Advocacy, this is Lydia. Ms. Crowell? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I was convicted 6 years ago for fraud my husband committed, and I just read your story. I need help. Lydia pulled out a legal pad. Tell me everything. She took notes while Jennifer talked, recognized patterns, saw familiar tactics, the gaslighting, the false testimony, the family closing ranks. I can help you, Lydia said when Jennifer finished. But you need to understand something. This won't be quick. It won't be easy. And you can't do it halfway. You have to be willing to see it through completely. I am. Are you sure? Because there will be moments when giving up seems easier. When the people who hurt you will offer settlements or apologies or reconciliation, and you'll be tempted to take it. But if you want justice, real justice, you have to be absolutely uncompromising. Silence. Then, I want them to face consequences, like yours did. Good. Then, let's get started. They worked for an hour, building a strategy. When they hung up, Lydia added Jennifer's name to the case board on her wall. 17 names now, 17 women she was helping claw their way back from family betrayal. She didn't save everyone. The system was still broken. But she saved some, and that mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Greg. Evan's up for parole review next month. The Crowells are lobbying for him. Thought you should know. Lydia stared at the message. Evan had served 3 years of his 5-year sentence. With good behavior, early release was possible. Part of her, the old part, the part that still remembered loving him, wondered if she should write a letter. Support his release. Show mercy. That part was small now, barely a whisper. She deleted the text without responding. The office door opened. Carol, her boss, stuck her head in. Heading home. Lydia glanced at the clock. 6:30. Soon. You work too much. I like the work. Carol smiled. I know. Just remember to live too, okay? You earned that. After Carol left, Lydia packed her bag, locked the office, walked to her car, a reliable Honda she'd bought with money saved from 3 years of careful employment. The apartment she lived in now was better than the first one. Bigger, cleaner, hers in a way nothing had been hers since before Evan. She made dinner, called no one, spent the evening reading case files for tomorrow's clients. And she was fine, better than fine. She was free, truly free, not just from prison, but from the need for anyone's approval or love or validation. The Crowells had tried to erase her, had tried to make her vanish into their convenient narrative. Instead, they'd created something harder, something that couldn't be broken or buried or silenced. They'd created someone who would never forgive, never forget, and who would spend the rest of her life making sure other women didn't disappear the way she almost had. On a Saturday morning 6 months later, Lydia drove past the house where she'd once lived with Evan. It was vacant now, a for sale sign in the yard. The lawn was overgrown. The paint was peeling. She didn't slow down. That life, that version of herself, was dead. She'd buried it herself, piece by piece, in a prison law library, while the family that had tried to destroy her rotted in cells of their own. And she'd never look back, because Lydia Crowell had learned the most important lesson prison could teach. Some people deserve forgiveness. The Crowells weren't those people. And justice, cold, patient, uncompromising justice, was the only mercy they'd ever get from her. She drove on, toward work, toward the next woman who needed saving, toward a future built on truth instead of lies. And she never stopped moving forward. Not once. Not ever.